Greetings, fine individuals. Welcome again to the Dr. Zero free magic secret show, where today we're going to talk a little bit about the basics of something called Egyptian tarot. Specifically, the Egyptian tarot created by Zain, an American occultist. We're going to talk a little bit about who he was, what differentiates Egyptian tarot from other forms, and some different kinds of tarot. And it's important we do this video first before I start jumping into lessons about Egyptian tarot or talking about the different cards, because it's entirely different from the more standard tarot that you may know that's based on the Tree of Life and most magical groups use, such as the Golden Dawn or fairly much anybody. The hugest difference is that instead of being based only on the Tree of Life, it is actually based on a thing called the Grand Pentagram, coming from Egyptian civilization, and it has to do with the pyramids and all the lessons of the wisdom school. And let me just give a breakdown, and this is going to be sort of like if you jumped you had to jump doing various leaps across different books that were all about 600 pages each. So I'm just going to kind of like condense it in a way that makes sense. So please just bear with me. So here's the deal, that the main thing, the main difference. Okay, so the regular tarot most people know is based on the Kabbalah. This is based on the Grand Pentagram. And what the Grand Pentagram does is it absorbs the entirety of the Kabbalah and makes a far more advanced version of it with so many more different options and different levels of polarity that it just blows it apart. My opinion and what I've noticed, and as anybody looking in should be able to see, is that the Jewish Kabbalah, and in turn the Hermetic Kabbalah, which is modeled similarly like it, a lot of it has to do with gut instincts. Like, for instance, Venus is number 7, and the number 7, it's they have it as green. Okay, it's important that it's green because Empress Venus, it has to do with Mother Earth. This is sort of like when witches talk about the Earth Mother and the whole idea of Gaia. It's sort of like the universal green, you could say. If Mother Earth, when Mother Earth extends outwardly throughout the entire universe and on planets we've never seen before that may or may not be, quote unquote, peopled with other intelligent life forms, we don't know. Well, maybe we do, but us civilians don't know. But so this is what we're talking about. When you think of plant life and lush, virgin, fertile earth, what comes to mind? Green. It's a gut instinct. The same when, say, the sun. Without even thinking about it, without even knowing, what color do you think the sun would be in this chart? Well, yellow. Well, gee, I wonder why. Again, gut instinct. Okay, so, and then Mars. Mars is righteous vengeance. Because you have to understand, the Tree of Life also holds its own dark, quote-unquote, power to it. See, when you talk about the Qliphoth, the reverse shadow tree of death, we have the exact opposite, the mirror opposite of Mars, and where Mars represents righteous vengeance, the shadow Mars would be basically like Hitler or something, like a dictator just mass murdering out of pure hatred, pure illogical hatred, or whatever, any discordant thing that wouldn't make any sense. It's just pure revenge for the sake of revenge, sadistic revenge. It's when the powers of the Qliphotic Mars are like taking sadistic revenge to levels that no one's ever seen, and it's like going from, if you went from like going volume 1 to 10, but somehow you found to go volume maximum forever infinity. That's where that leads. So again, we're going back to the other side of the coin. So the Jewish Kabbalah is a bit more gut instinct, and especially when it ties in the correspondences of scents and smells of incense and oils and stuff. And again, the right word for this is olfactory, anything to do with the senses. So olfactory magic, if you've never heard the term. And we deal with that extensively on the show, and you should look for other videos as well about perfume magic and incense magic, etc. So the Egyptian tarot differs. It represents the deepest spiritual lessons and wisdom lessons of the Egyptians. And some people will say that they think this card deck is kind of phony because of its lineage. And I'm going to get to that shortly, and why it's yes and no, but at the same time, it's absolutely relevant still. Okay, so let's just put that aside for now and continue. So this is about the Grand Pentagram, and it has it compacts all the wisdom of not only the Egyptian worlds and how they saw things from their viewpoint, but it also brings in on a smaller frame all the wisdom teachings of Mesopotamia and Sumer, as well as the Israelites, the Hebrew people. It has all the Gnostic ideas in there, all kinds of Greek ideas. It better contains the ancient ideas of wisdom than the Kabbalah. It's just like if you took the Kabbalah diagram and then physically touched it and pulled it out like an accordion, and it went like ridiculously far, and it just kept going on and on and on. Okay, so getting back to that, and so what the Egyptian tarot cards, what they do is they peel. Okay, so Moses was a student of the Egyptian mystery schools. People from all over the ancient world would go to Egypt to learn the deepest lessons that they had of spiritual knowledge. And all of these ideas got kicked down further and further and further. Okay, and when Moses learned all this stuff, when he returned to the Jewish people, all the lessons he turned, all his secret knowledge, all his occult knowledge, he re-explained these Egyptian lessons through Jewish mythology and Jewish language and Jewish terms. And it's slowly incorporated into their mythology. So when you get, say, a Rider-Waite deck and the Golden Dawn cards, all that stuff, all that's heavily in. When we say Western magic, we're talking about stuff that was influenced by the Jewish folks and what we usually went with them. Okay, and getting to that, what this deck does is it peels away the mythology that has been cast on these cards and just takes them back to the original Egyptian source. It just kind of like peels off the fake photo and reveals the true photo underneath. And the thing is, since you get the tree of life out of the picture, you get the Sephiroth and the tarot trumps conceived as the pathways in between the Sephiroth, you get rid of this concept, and then you free all these ideas of that framework, and then you're able to amplify it. You're able to keep it solidified in that same way. It's just re-explained different. And so what you have is a different setup and a different pattern, and an even more intense exploration of what we would call a gematria or arithmology, which is number magic, and studying all that. They're much more complex. Okay, so with each, they're leading from the Egyptian lesson, right? But each card also maintains the Jewish letter that would correspond for their lesson. It also has the color, and this isn't the color of the Kabbalah, which has always been kind of a sketchy thing. When they tried to do the colors on the Kabbalah, that was a later invention. When they did the king scale, queen scale, etc., again, those are later inventions. And also when you look at the Kabbalah pass on the Tree of Life and you start hearing about this is the so-and-so intelligence and the so-and-so intelligence, that's a later invention as well. So you can scale back the Kabbalah to the Jewish Kabbalah, at least back to its basic formations of what does the polarity mean, what does the color mean, and what does the scent or like essence mean. It's a very gut instinct, boom, kind of thing. So the Egyptian one, when we talk about the colors of the Egyptian cards, they have their own colors, but they're considered the color of aura, and it has to do with the aura vibrational rate that everyone has in harmony with the cosmos. It's more like a universal gnosis aura. And it was said that like the seers of like the ancient Egyptian priests could like see this kind of stuff. It's a different kind of, I guess, aura than one would gets more labeled today. But of course, there's a crossover because how can there not be? So that's the interesting. The color correspondence is going to be about aura and vibratory rate. And instead of pulling lessons about Sephiroth and such, what it is it figures out astrology. And say when two planets line up, and then a third planet, which becomes like the high note of the pairing, right? So it's a really intense astrological deck, as well as presenting all the number mysticism. It gives you all the lessons of the pyramids, and it gives you all the lessons of the Kabbalah at the same time. And what's also interesting is that in the book that accompanies this deck, okay, so this deck came out around, I believe, 1934, somewhere around there. So if I'm correct, this book pretty much predates all of the books that Israel Regardie put out after Golden Dawn collapsed and such, all that stuff. Because C.C. Zain was around the same time, and this writer put out most of his stuff in the 1920s, 1930s, into the 1940s and such. Died in 1951. So he was sort of the contemporary of Israel Regard, and he isn't like the poor man's Israel Regardie. He's just as brilliant. And the thing is, his works have been kept alive by this one group. I'll keep talking about it later, but let's just say that. So we have the two main schools, pretty much the two most important teachers of tarot, I think, in the 20th century that should be paid attention to as like standard, is everything Israel Regardie put out, and he was the personal secretary of Aleister Crowley, and he was a member of the Golden Dawn, and he lived until 1985. And then you got C.C. Zain, who died in 1951. But he was more tied to, I guess, what was seen as New Age movement or psychic movements or astrological fraternities, stuff like that. He was involved with Hermetics, but I don't think he was a member of Golden Dawn, if I'm correct. He was kind of young for that. But anyway, returning, we're going to get back to him in a second. So yeah, so Egyptian tarot has all these amazing functions, all right? And the most important thing that it teaches here is that there's a number scheme, okay? And it by all means, it seems to be the absolutely correct number scheme because it ties to Pythagoras and such. Because here's the thing. The main decks known today are like Rider-Waite, Marseille, Golden Dawn styled, all those correspondences. And then you have the Thelema, Aleister Crowley, Book of Thoth deck, which has its different correspondences. And the thing is, both the magicians on the one side and the Aleister Crowley, Thelema people on the other, they're off to a degree because they were guessing at the tarot card order. Because again, this is skipping to another 500-page book, where tarot cards came from in the first place. They started to pop up in our record in the 1700s as an instrument of gambling. No one was really sure where they came from. They just were around and they were mysterious and they had this legend to them. And then, of course, in the 1800s, there's a big revival of people interested in magic stuff. And the big revival really kickstarts by a guy named Eliphas Levi in France. And we're going to talk about him a little bit too. So Eliphas Levi was sort of like the first guy who pops up and noisily kind of resurrects this pagan, magical, Gnostic, Hermetic, ritual, ceremonial magic underground that had kind of been dormant, and kind of brought it back and made it cool again and all that stuff. So that's like the late 1700s in France. And then by the late 1800s, 100 years later, from his inertia, that's where a lot of the Golden Dawn people are now popped up, and they unite together. And the same way like the hippies got together in 60s San Francisco, a bunch of the magic people got together in London and Victorian England and other places in England, and kind of made a big attempt at a big collective of kind of in a utopian, naive, innocent way. They thought they could band all together, but it all fell apart for one reason or another. And part of that is magic is individualistic, and everybody has kind of an ego. And it doesn't mean it's a bad thing having ego, but when you have you trying to build a organization of people who want to be autonomous and independent is going to lead to its own collapse. So you shouldn't be sour grapes about it. You should just understand that from the very beginning, and not be so heartbroken when that occurs. So that's all part of it. So anyway, nobody was really sure the exact correct order or where the tarot cards were coming from. These days we know for sure, okay? So if you don't believe me, you can look it up, and I promise you this is the actual origin, okay? So the Jewish Kabbalah came out about 1200s, or they say 13th century. I think 1250 around there was when the actual symbolism came out, and then around 1350 is when the symbol of the Tree of Life became more well known throughout Europe and became more commonplace and whatever. It took a while. Okay, so at some point in the 1300s, at the royal courts in Italy, they realized from I think 1200 onward, the people that had money realized that you could teach your children and educate them by using flashcards. So basically, like the original educational systems were maybe like 20 or 30 or 40 big painted flashcards, and it will just be like a picture of Mars, a picture of a bishop, a picture of a judge or something, and they would be teaching their children roles of society and different levels of society to like 5 and 6 year olds that were going to be like royal administrators one day. These weren't like super developed magical tarot cards. They were more like what we would have for kids today. Okay, so this was kind of in vogue in how they were doing it. So what it turns out is that sometime in I think it's 1428, the Renaissance is in swing, and one of these royal courts in Florence, Italy, had contacted a Jewish goldsmith who lived in Venice, Italy, and had them make this set of cards, right? Now, we don't know for certain if it was created specifically to like be a game of solitaire with the universe, basically, is because Kabbalah is like kind of a game in itself when you learn how all the things work. And if you lay out the tarot in three separate equal rows, and then you have 3 cards for the finals, it turns into a game. And there's a website, it's called the Restored Tarot. I think the website is www.psycheasinteraction.com. If you just Google those terms, you should be able to find it. I don't know if that's the exact thing, but that website, they go back to the original Sephirot Zeero, that is the pre-Zohar correspondences, all this stuff, and it really lays out the case. So long story short is that we don't know if it was specifically taught to teach Kabbalah, or the lady, whoever ordered it from this guy, like just was interested in what he was talking about, or however it went. They knew each other somehow. So these cards show up, and it's like this beautiful gold-plated deck that this guy makes. And then basically like it was shown around to the people who worked in the royal courts. They knew about it, and they started to kind of like copy it and use it. And they basically turned it into gambling. So it became like this kind of just local, regional fake. They were making like replicas. They replicated the deck and then used it for gambling. And then it got lost over time, and people forgot where it came from. And then they became mysterious, because the first time we have them on record is Napoleonic France. They were used as gambling. So, but it was basically, it was either taught, either she just wanted something pretty and this guy made it and he knew what he was doing because he was Jewish, or she specifically wanted a Kabbalah deck for whatever purpose. But this is when Golden Dawn and people like that in the late 1800s, when they were trying to figure out tarot cards, it was really obvious that whoever made this had Kabbalah in mind. And as they started to look at all the pictures and how it all interrelated, they're like, these cards are the flashcards for the Tree of Life. There's no way around it. And they knew that, but they didn't know what the actual directions of the game, or the directions of what was what. You know what I mean? So they just made their best educated guess after tons and tons of research. And the same thing with Aleister Crowley. He did the same, knowing that these ideas traced back to ancient Egypt. And he said, all right, I'm going to take it back to its ancient roots. I'm going to reorder these cards a bit. And at the same time, he's going to make himself the boss hog of his own, it's not a cult, but I'm the leader, blah, 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 decadent thing. And that's Aleister Crowley's big downfall right there. So the short story is that the Golden Dawn and Aleister Crowley, neither of them really knew the correct order. And Aleister Crowley butchered it, and he's got like 8 cards out of place or more, and it screws up the mathematical everything that's going on behind the scenes of the Kabbalah, because the Kabbalah has all these numerical reasons, number magic behind it. So Crowley doesn't know what he's doing. And on top of that, he interjected all of his own crap on it, all kinds of the Selimic nonsense. So it sort of cancels it out. It doesn't add up. And I'm sorry, people might not want to hear that. The cards are beautiful. And now here's the thing, and I must say, like, Aleister Crowley, he's got all this great research, all done by Israel Regardie, by the way. And Crowley's got a great way of presenting information, but he's like a shock rock guy, like of what we would have in the metal scene today. He's another shock rock guy. He's another infomercial saying guy with a YouTube channel. You know, he's another one of those, but for like the 1800s. So let's just be honest with Aleister Crowley. So anyway, so his whole deck, as far as his deck goes, I discount it. I won't even touch it. It's a waste of time. Just learn. It's because it's impossible to realize what is goofy BS that he forced on facts. I mean, the thing is, I've been able to go to his stuff and been able to sort out what's forced, what's not. And this, there's great writing if you're able to segregate it, but you shouldn't have to do that with anybody's writing. It's just, learn what you can from him and move on. That's my message with Crowley. So anyway, so the Golden Dawn, they tried the best, but they still had some other cards out of place that didn't make it all flow together. So if you want to figure out the real one, like I said, there's a Psyche as Interaction, the Restored Tarot. There's a whole website, a whole group, and you got to just keep clicking through the site. There are all these little hidden links because there's so much power on that site. They want to hide how to navigate it. They don't want anybody just finding it. So if you hear this and you fucking are into tarot, and you obviously are, because that's what's going on right now, you go find that site. You should just pause what I'm saying, go find that, and then return to this. And I won't have no hurt feelings about it. Trust me. So anyway, with all that said, now we go to this other source. Now, C.C. Zain, the writer, here's his deal. He was born in 1882. He was a farm boy for Iowa. He had super psychic, very clairvoyant, all kinds of intense stuff, channeling. He's just like this powerhouse of a person, like from a cornfield farm boy, like Superman, in Kansas. He's just some dude. And he starts writing for all these like astrological magazines and stuff, like zines, like punk rock zines of the 1900s, when you know what I mean, for astrology and magic groups. And he starts getting into this like underground, mail each other, like stapled together zines sort of old school way that they're doing it. His parents are freaked out, all that stuff. So basically, like, to shield his parents from like whatever and to not humiliate them or ruin their names or whatever, like he ended up moving to some big city to get in the crowd of astrology, whatever. He adopted the name C.C. Zain. It's sort of like his pen name / alter ego. And there's a reason for that. If you read the Sacred Tarot book I'm talking about, he explains. So basically, he's like 20 years old or so, and it's like 1902. And then of all the people, the Hermetic Order of Luxor from Switzerland contacts him because they know his writings. And they say, we've been waiting for the right person all these years. And one of the true ancient, as far back as you can pretty much get with the Hermetic crowd, this secret old school lodge that had been around for who knows how long and possessed all this like occult knowledge that was tucked away in Switzerland, contacts him, and they're like, we want to tell you all the secrets of everything because we want you to be like the new secretary / writer and reestablish everything, whatever. So it was sort of like they were the Golden Dawn that the Golden Dawn didn't have access to. Like the Golden Dawn was always trying to get like information from these guys. Like they were like super deep, true Hermetic. We're not even going to join the big crowd, So this dude comes in and he becomes like C.C. Zain becomes like their new writer guy. He becomes a new head. He ends up leaving and doing his own thing and continues writing. And then this group of astrology people or whatever, this new agey kind of group in I think it's the late 20s or early 30s, they're called the Brotherhood of Light. And they are studying astrological magic. And they say, hey, we love your stuff. We want you to come write and work with us and do stuff. And he accepted. And then they basically just turned around and like he could have started a cult right there, but he refused. He's like, I'm not like Aleister Crowley or someone like that. Like, I'm not the leader. I'm just gonna. They're no, we're gonna publish all your books. They basically turned into a publishing house of this dude. You turn like basically the way that like the island of Pythagoras, and they turned into like Pythagoras's little kingdom. He could have had all that but didn't make it that way. So he becomes like a major figure and he puts out like 34 books. He ends up dying in 1951, and then the organization just kept going and going. They're still together today, and they're still putting out his stuff and his tarot cards and everything. So this is like 70 years later. So the point is, with Egyptian tarot, all of the deepest old school number schemes of what tarot really is and how it's based, he built this Egyptian tarot deck based on the Hermetic Order of Luxor stuff, which is an extremely coherent system that also, again, he found a way to include all the Egyptian stuff as well. So it's sort of like an encoded morass that like it's got all this in it, and a lot of people look the other way because people, oh no, it's tarot was not Egyptian, blah, blah, blah. Well, here's the thing is that the lessons that are on the cards, the Egyptian cards, and how they interrelate to the Rider Waite, all this stuff, these are all lessons they were teaching in mystery schools. It's all legitimate stuff. And okay, here's where all this is coming from, this misinformation about how the people thought tarot really originated in Egypt. Okay, so here's the deal. I mentioned earlier Eliphas Levi. He's the first one in late 1700s France to get it going again. Or maybe it was early 1800s, if I'm correct. Around there. After Barrett with the book The Magus, right? So Eliphas Levi, early 1800s, late 1700s, somewhere around there. So one of his students wrote a book called Egyptian Tarot, right? And where that's coming from, and that's where the lessons of this Egyptian Tarot that C.C. Zain furthered come from. Now, again, so you say you cry BS on that, whatever, but it's all legitimate stuff and stuff that Eliphas Levi was teaching, and it was just kind of passed off like, oh no, this is absolutely the original source. Well, it is absolutely original source. It's just not exactly, but it's all there. So that's the importance. So you can back that up just a little bit further, and this is an interesting anecdote to add into all of it as well, okay? So the guy that was Eliphas Levi's student who actually wrote the Egyptian Tarot book that later got upgraded and codified by C.C. Zain that we're talking about now, crank all the way back. The dude who was the student of Eliphas Levi read a book by Iamblichus called On the Mysteries. Now, Iamblichus, this is a fake Iamblichus book. This is another book that has a fake author attached to it. Now, who's Iamblichus? Crank. Iamblichus was an old school philosopher who was like the next coming of Pythagoras, but not as good, and with a lot of crank ideas that a lot of people dismiss because he had a lot of like really out there wackadoo Gnostic ideas that just absolutely weren't happening, but he was also brilliant at the same time. And because of his reputation, like so many other things, King Solomon or Virgil or whoever else, people started making fake works under his name and passing it off. So crank. Somebody makes a fake Iamblichus book called On the Mysteries, but all the information is true. It has to do with ancient Egypt. They're just using his name to get it out there. So this is the bridge, right? Here's another interesting anecdote about all this. If anybody's a reader out there, there's a writer named Henry Miller. He's a very famous American writer. He wrote a book called Tropic of Cancer, Tropic of Capricorn, Black Spring, Colossus of Morosi, The Air-Conditioned Nightmare. He wrote The Rosy Crucifixion. It's got 3 books called Sexus, Plexus, Nexus. He's one of the best ever. And if you read his story, there's a whole thing about how when his wife left him, he got real depressed. And then when he was just a blob on a couch, completely depressed, he had this moment where he saw his whole life and all the books he would ever write all just like spring out of him, like tarot cards everywhere. And he wrote them all down. And this was like the moment that launched him and created one of the greatest American writers of all time. And it turns out the book that he was obsessed with and thinking about at that time was On the Mysteries by the fake Iamblichus, and was literally the Egyptian tarot that we're talking about now. So if you're a Henry Miller fan, this whole Egyptian tarot shit, everything that he's talking about in all his books are coded references to this. And C.C. Zain was the first person who actually made a set of cards and a new upgraded book based on all this stuff. So what lit the fire under Henry Miller's ass and made his whole canon occur was this set we're talking about now. And it's a very, very interesting thing as far as that's concerned. So moving on, I'm trying to think, we should maybe wrap this up. Okay, I'll just talk briefly more about C.C. Zain, I guess. A little bit more about this deck. Okay, so there's this deck. It came out in the 1930s, black and white originally. They're worth a lot of money if you can get an old set. These days, they have a reprinted color set. It's not so bad looking. It's not as cool as the old ones, but you can't really find the old ones. But there's a hardcover white book that comes with it called The Sacred Tarot by C.C. Zain. And it's the most densely written book on tarot you could ever find. And the thing is, like, if I had only one book to recommend to anyone interested in the history of magic or ritual magic, ceremonial magic, alchemy, any of the stuff that we talk about on any of these YouTube channels, witchcraft, whatever you want to say, if I had only one book to pick out of the entire human civilization to just give someone and say, if you want to understand this shit, this is it. This is that book, without question. And I don't work for this Brotherhood of Light organization. I'm just a guy who found this book used on a bookshelf for a couple bucks one day, and it was like an old copy of it that was all beat up. And I was like, what the fuck is it? I never found this guy's stuff anywhere until I found him online. So he's been dead for like 71 years, but he's always had this little tiny self-publisher pumping out his stuff because he just passed out the copyrights to them and said, just keep going forever. I don't care. I'm me. So he came and went, and he could have made himself some weird cult leader guy, but he didn't, and he didn't care, and he just wanted to educate. And so you have this book, The Sacred Tarot, and not only does it systematically explain all this crazy stuff, all this number magic, as it goes through the cards, it systematically lays out, here's what this card means, not only in the sense of the Hermetic stuff and in the Egyptian stuff and with how it means with normal Jewish Kabbalah, but it also explains, here's the direct Bible quote, how it relates to Christianity. Here's what it means in Catholicism. Here's what it is in spiritual alchemy. Here's what it is in like witchcraft. Here's what it is in like straight up like magic. And he's not shying away from talking about black magic at all. Like he talks more about left hand stuff, even though he's like solidly not on that. He very candid and open about all kinds of things, right? And he really knows what he's talking about. So the thing is, what's also interesting is that he knows what he's talking about, is because in this book, he makes no mention of the Qliphoth whatsoever. There's no way he didn't know that existed. He just doesn't bring it up. And one of the things that people may detract about this book is that when he talks about the left-hand pillar of the regular old tree of life, a lot of people stuck that tree of evil tagline on that, and he does that in this book, but we all know it's like the malefic side of the tree. The true tree of evil is the shadow tree, and now he might have just probably intentionally been doing this to throw people off. And the thing is, like, people kind of turn away from this book because they see, here's what it means in the Bible, here's what it means to the Freemasons, here's what it means to what, and they think that that's the central point. No, see, he's just an old-timey author, and the same way when you read, Cornelius Agrippa, and he kind of pays lip service to the fucking the Christians and the bishops and stuff, and like he's real like stepping on eggshells, trying to like buffer it before he's like, okay, here's my big like, I'm apologizing for everything I'm about to write, but boom, and then he becomes Cornelius Agrippa. This has a bit of that balance to it, where if someone from the outside looked in, they wouldn't get freaked out and like want to burn the book immediately, because this is the era that he's in. So he's really obvious with it. So you have to understand, all these writers, they were doing it to cover their own ass, right? And so it's got a bit of that. Okay. Now, So my point is, just order this thing wherever you can get it. And if you can get the hardcover book, I like brand new, it might be like $20 or something. And I think the cards are like, there's a smaller deck and a larger deck. You should just get the larger deck. They look way better. They're way cooler. And I think it's an extra $5 or something. You might be able to find the old school 30s deck for like maybe $100 if you're lucky. And who knows where those have been, but yeah. So CC Zain puts out like something 34 books total and other random writings, but some of his stuff, somebody might look in and be like, oh, it's kind of crackpotty, so I'm gonna ignore him. Well, like, yeah, okay, so maybe even if some things he's talking about here and there might sound like crackpot esoteric, he's talking about ectoplasm and he's talking about the ether waves, and he's starting to get turn into like minor iamblichus kind of ways, what have you, here and there stuff. But for the most part, like 90%, or I'd say 96% of this dude is totally solid. There's about 4% where I'm like scratching my head being like, you're just kind of out there. But so what? He's a little tripped out. Anybody who's deeply into magic like this is slightly cracked in some kind of way to the outside world. But there was no malevolence in this guy. He was on the up and up, and all he had was people respecting him after his death. Like he never had any detractors, and he left behind this huge wealth of information that nobody knows about. And I'm going to talk a lot about his cards in the future. So I'm sick of explaining this once again. This is Dr. Zeero. Please hit subscribe and let people know I exist. I can't promote myself. This show is like a mystery. You're supposed to pass it off. That's how it works. It's like little Orphan Annie and then decoder ring. You got to decode it yourself and tell your friends. Tell them all. Hey, guy. And then you walk up to my door, you go, knock, knock, knock. That's my knock, knock, knock with my tongue. And then you go, trick or treat. And I go, you want to trick or you want to treat? And they're like, we don't know. And I'm like, well, I do. I'm going to tell you whatever I want. And then, I like to give both, tricks and treats. Oh, me, oh, my. So anyway, until next time, kids, have a good evening.